Want to highlight another wing here. We're going a little bit younger on this one. He is a player that some have picked to win Most Improved Player. He is already one of the best defenders in the league, at least wing defenders. He had a phenomenal season in 22-23. Jaden McDaniels, it actually looks like he's going to miss the opening game here for the Timberwolves, which is a shame. Doesn't look to be anything serious, but even though he's going to miss the opening night game for Minnesota, he is a lot richer with a 5-year, $136 million extension in his pocket that was signed just about 2 days ago. So for this extension, I don't think it's surprising at all. Most people kind of expected 100 plus million coming his way. The numbers don't reflect that. 12 points a game last season, 3.9 boards. You look at those numbers, it's like, okay, why does he warrant a contract of over $100 million, 5 years? Well, like I mentioned before, premier defender, he's already an all defensive team level guy. Those guys don't grow on trees. That's very valuable. He also has the upside to be a featured player on offense. You go watch some clips from him last season. He can create his own shot, especially in the mid range. He's a lengthy guy, about 6'9". He can really do a lot on the offensive end. He kind of expanded his offensive repertoire last season, which is where the appeal comes from. So for the Timberwolves, they're looking at their core. They have the big men. They have the guard Ant-Man. Hey, who is that Swiss Army knife type of guy that doesn't need the ball in his hands every possession, but can still make some things happen on both ends? He plays a similar role to Chris Middleton, really thinking about it. He's not the premier shot maker that Chris is yet, but he can get there. He showed flashes last season. So that's why he commands an extension this rich. So for the Timberwolves, now they've solidified their place in being in that one of those upper echelon spenders in the luxury tax. And I did the math. I mean, they're not far off of $130 million next season between 4 players. If you add in the salaries of Cat, Gobert, Edwards, and McDaniels, I mean, somewhere between 120 and 130. And on our site here, a no trade clause, we project the salary cap for next season to be 142. So they're already up against that line with 4 players. And then the tax line to be 173, thereabout. So they're about 40 to 45 million away from the luxury tax line without even paying a full starting lineup. So when you think about that, it's like they're really serious about this. They're going all in. And as was pointed out on Twitter not too long ago, this is a team that hasn't been in this territory, like a serious tax spending team, in a long time. They haven't been really relevant here very, very much in the past several years. This is new territory. They have new ownership coming in here. It's a new era for the Timberwolves. So I think that's why they made this deal, and they're really just kind of throwing all these contracts out there, guys. They're really trying to make the next step. So that's kind of where I'm at with the extension. What do you see from your side in this extension, Inigo?
Yeah, like you mentioned, 5 years, $136 million. $5 million of that 136 is in incentives for if he makes the all defense team and defensive player of the year. So it's like you said, his statistics in terms of points, rebounds, etc., don't look necessarily impressive, but defense is a little bit hard to quantify. But clearly there is significant value there. He routinely guards the other team's best player. He's one of the best defenders in the league. So he has quite the reputation. I think that contract is good. 5 years, $131 million. It starts at just under 16% and ends just over 17%. I actually think that's really good value for Minnesota. The problem with Minnesota is that they have that Rudy Gobert contract. And so that's really what's pushing up their salary so significantly. They're going to be over the apron next year. They're likely going to be over the apron the year after. And that limits their flexibility. I think there's a lot of pressure on this team to perform really well in the first half of the season. Come trade deadline, everyone kind of knows that they have one big pivot move, and that's trading Karl Anthony Towns. They won't be able to get much value for Rudy Gobert. They're not going to move Anthony Edwards. So really the big chip is going to be Cat. So we'll see where that goes. They may not want to trade him, but if this team underperforms and misses the playoffs, then their hands going to be forced this offseason to do something, because they are paying a lot of money for this roster. I think that this Jaden McDaniels signing is really good on its own, but I think that the team and the front office has to make some decisions on what are their expectations. And, ownership, when they're paying that kind of money and you're dipping into the tax and you're over the second apron and you're, putting your draft picks in jeopardy, well, you're expecting results. You're expecting your team to not just be a playoff team, but to be a contender. So we'll see what happens here, but I'm a little nervous for Minnesota. And then, this is the final season of Mike Conley's contract as well. So what's their solution at point guard long term? They basically have two centers, an aging point guard around a potential superstar in Anthony Edwards, and a premier defender in McDaniels. So they have some really good pieces, but they also have some things to figure out. And hopefully this team can figure it out before they have to make some drastic moves.
That much is clear. Haven't really been a huge supporter of that Gobert trade ever since it happened. And you look at the way that the roster's constructed, the roster's been managed, and I'm not a believer in that front court. Those two guys working together, fitting together. I don't see it. That's why I don't have them very high on my predictions as far as seeding predictions. Could be wrong. They can end up as a top 4 or 5 seed, but I really have them kind of in that 6 to 8 range right now. And it's really just kind of like you said, it's a lot of pressure on this team to perform right away. And especially if Jaden McDaniels is going to be hurting, missing some games here, that's just a really tough pill to swallow. To highlight Jaden here a little bit more and his importance to this team, his usage has gone up every season. So he started at about 10% in his rookie season in 2021. Last year, he ended up almost at 15%. So his usage is starting to slightly climb. If anything happens to Cat or Gobert this season in terms of injuries, I would expect that to climb even higher. And then looking at his defensive impact, there's a lot of numbers, like you said, that can kind of influence the defensive reputation. But just looking at one, which is how the team performs per 100 possessions on defense when he's out of the game. They give up about 3.1 less points per 100 possessions. That's in the 77th percentile as position. So obviously he has a huge impact on defense. That's where most of his value comes from. But he still has a good amount of growth left offensively to where he can fill in as maybe like a third option for this team behind Cat and Ant-Man. So that's where it comes from. And we're on the same page. This team has to make things happen quickly. And if they don't, radical changes are on the horizon. They have the most pressure on them, along with, I think, Philadelphia and New Orleans, Minnesota. Those three teams, it's like, well, you got to win right now. Like the Lakers as well, some other teams. But those three, to me, it's just like, man, the pressure is immense because there's so much invested in these teams with the money and everything else. Like, you got to make it happen. So we'll see how it kind of shakes out for them. Wanted to at least get to one more player here that signed an extension. We're going to a player I feel like doesn't get quite the same amount of recognition, the same amount of credit as the previous two players, but he's still really important to their team.